Hello, and welcome. If you've clicked on this video, perhaps you're standing at the edge of something new, something you never chose to begin. Maybe life has swept away what you built, what you loved, what you thought would last forever. Before we begin our story together, if you find even a moment of peace here, feel free to like the video and join our quiet community by subscribing. Let me know in the comments one small thing that brought you comfort today. It could be the smell of morning coffee, a kind word from a stranger, or simply the fact that you're still here, still trying. Now, settle in. Close your eyes if you wish. Let's travel to a small mountain village, where the air is thin and clean, and where smoke still rises from chimneys at dawn. In this village lived a baker named Samuel. For 30 years, his hands had known the feel of warm dough, the rhythm of kneading, the gentle science of yeast and time. His bakery sat at the heart of the village square, a stone building with windows that glowed amber in the pre-dawn hours, sending the scent of fresh bread through narrow streets like a daily prayer. Samuel's father had taught him the trade, and his father before him. The recipes were written in faded ink on cards soft with flour dust. The sourdough starter had been alive for 3 generations, bubbling quietly in its ceramic crock like a contented cat. Every morning, Samuel would arrive in the darkness, light the great stone oven, and begin the ancient dance of creation. The villagers knew his rhythms. Mrs. Chen would arrive at 7 for her daily loaf of rye. The schoolchildren would press their faces against his windows, watching the croissants buff and golden in the heat. On Sundays, the whole village would gather around his tables, sharing his honey cakes and stories. Samuel's bread was more than food. It was the heartbeat of the community, the thing that drew people together when words failed. But fire, when it comes, asks no permission. It started in the electrical wiring, old and tired after decades of faithful service. Samuel awoke to the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling wood. By the time the volunteer fire brigade arrived, the flames had already claimed everything: the ovens, the wooden shelves, the copper pots, the recipe cards. Even the sourdough starter that had lived longer than any human in the village. In the gray morning light, Samuel stood before a skeleton of charred beams and ash, 61 years old. With flour-stained hands and nowhere to bake bread, the village rallied, as villages do. They gave him money, a temporary kitchen in the community center, new equipment. "Just get back to what you know," they said with hopeful smiles. "Make us your wonderful bread again." But Samuel discovered something that felt like a second death. He couldn't remember. Oh, he remembered the basic steps: flour, water, salt, yeast. But the details, the secrets that made his bread sing, they had lived in his fingers, in the particular way his father had shown him to fold the dough, in the exact moment when the starter would bubble just so. They had lived in those recipe cards, in the familiar weight of his own wooden spoons, in the temperament of his old stone oven. Every morning, he would arrive at the community center kitchen and try to recreate what he had lost. The bread would emerge from the modern convection of inedible, certainly, but somehow hollow. It tasted like memory trying to become real again. The villagers were kind. They bought his bread and smiled and said it was delicious. But Samuel could see the disappointment in their eyes, the way they chewed a little longer, searching for the taste of home that wasn't there. Week after week, failure after failure. The bread that had once brought joy now felt like a mockery. Samuel began to wake in the middle of the night, his chest tight with panic. What if he had lost it forever? What if the fire had taken not just his bakery, but his very essence, the thing that made him who he was? He started avoiding the village square, taking long walks into the mountains instead. The guilt ate at him like acid. These people had given him everything, and he was failing them. Failing himself. Maybe, he thought, 61 was too old to start over. Maybe some things, once broken, couldn't be mended. It was on one of these mountain walks that Samuel met the wandering monk. He was sitting beside the path, a small man with weathered hands, sharing his simple meal with the birds. Samuel had seen him before in the village. He would appear for a few days, help with small tasks, then disappear again like morning mist. "You walk like a man carrying stones," the monk said without looking up. Samuel sat heavily on a fallen log. "I was a baker," he said. "Now I'm nothing." The monk smiled, still watching the birds pick at scattered crumbs. "The fire took your bakery." "Everything." 30 years of knowledge, gone in one night. The monk nodded. "And now you try to rebuild exactly what was lost." "Of course. That's what I do. That's who I am." The monk was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his small pack and pulled out a handful of seeds. "I carry these wherever I go," he said. "Apple seeds from a tree that grew in my teacher's garden. That tree was struck by lightning 20 years ago, burned to the ground." He let the seeds roll around in his palm. "I could spend my whole life trying to grow that exact tree again. Same shape, same height, same sweetness in the fruit. But do you know what I learned?" Samuel shook his head. "Ashes are the soil of something new." The monk looked at Samuel directly for the first time. "The tree that grows from this burned ground will not be the same tree. It will be its own tree, with its own gifts. The lightning that destroyed the old tree, it also prepared the ground for something that had never existed before." The monk stood, brushing crumbs from his simple robes. "Your recipes are gone, yes. But your hands still know the language of dough. Your heart still knows the joy of feeding people. The fire took your past, but it cannot take your capacity to create." He began to walk away, then turned back. "There is bread in you that has never been baked before. Bread that could only come from someone who has walked through fire and emerged with ash-blessed hands." That night, Samuel returned to the community center kitchen. But instead of trying to resurrect his old recipes, he simply began. He mixed flour and water and salt, but this time he listened to his hands instead of his memory. When the dough felt too stiff, he added water. When it felt too slack, he added flour. He let his fingers teach him again, as if he were learning for the first time. The bread that emerged was nothing like what he had made before. It was denser, darker, with a crust that crackled when it cooled. It tasted of the mountains, somehow earthy and wild, and completely unfamiliar. He almost threw it away. This wasn't his bread. This wasn't what people expected. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the monk's words, or maybe it was simply exhaustion with failure. He wrapped the loaf in a clean towel and walked to Mrs. Chen's house. "I made something new," he said simply when she opened the door. "I don't know if it's any good." Mrs. Chen took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then took another. Her eyes widened. "Samuel," she said softly, "this tastes like grief turned into something beautiful." Word spread quickly through the small village. Samuel's new bread was nothing like the old, but it was something else entirely, something that seemed to speak to the parts of people that had also walked through fire. The widow who had lost her husband tried it and said it tasted like comfort. The young man who had lost his job said it gave him strength. The children said it tasted like adventure. Samuel began experimenting with other ingredients he had never used before: mountain herbs, seeds from the forest, honey from different flowers. Each loaf was an exploration, a conversation between his scarred hands and the raw materials of creation. The bakery, when it was finally rebuilt, looked different too. The windows were larger, letting in more light. The ovens were smaller, more intimate. There were tables where people could sit and eat together, sharing not just bread but stories. On the first morning in his new bakery, Samuel arrived in the familiar darkness and lit the ovens. But as he mixed his first batch of dough, he noticed something that made him smile. His sourdough starter, this new one, born from wild yeasts and mountain air, bubbled with a different rhythm than the old one. It was its own living thing, carrying its own mysteries. Mrs. Chen arrived at 7, as she always had. But now she brought friends, drawn by the warm light and the scent of something unprecedented. Samuel's bread had become a gathering place for all the villagers who had ever started over, ever lost something precious, ever discovered that the end of one thing could be the beginning of another. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the stone walls golden, Samuel understood what the monk had meant. He was still a baker, but he was not the same baker. The fire had not destroyed him, it had revealed him. The ashes of his old life had indeed become the soil for something new. And so Samuel learned that starting over was not about rebuilding what was lost, but about discovering what was possible. The fire had taken his recipes, but it had also freed him from them. His new bread was not better or worse than the old, it was simply, authentically, newly his. Perhaps our own lives are the same. When everything familiar burns away, we have a choice. We can spend our energy trying to resurrect what was, or we can put our hands in the ashes and discover what wants to be born. Starting over is not a punishment for failure. It is an invitation to become who we were always meant to be, once everything unnecessary has been burned away. The monk was right, ashes are the soil of something new. And you who have walked through your own fire, your hands are blessed with the power to create something that has never existed before. May you trust in your own capacity to begin again. May you find courage in the unknown. And may you discover that the end of one story is simply the first page of another. Be well, and rest easy.